a section foreman is what my father was, a section foreman, and they had a section of track that was 12 miles long generally. The railroad was broken up into 12-mile sections, and each piece had a section. It was a Squamish section, Cheakamus section, Garibaldi section, Water Tank section, Alta Lake section, Green River section, Pemberton section, Birkin section, Darcy, and Shallouth. We actually lived in Shallouth, which is Bridge River, and that's how it went. And they were in charge of that chunk of track, maintenance-wise, ties, rails, make sure the gauge is good, stuff like that. On the train crews, you had the conductor who was in charge. He was the one that told the locomotive engineer when he could move. An engineer cannot start an engine and move it without a signal from somebody, a trainman or a conductor. And that was just, it's funny that nobody ever really got hurt because you had to, well, they shouldn't say that, but they did get hurt, some did. But nowadays, if you want to make a local, if you want to do anything on a train, you want to go in between it to do up a hose bag or anything, you have to get the engineer, you have to tell him, you tell him what you're doing, and he has to give a thing like set and centered or 3-point protection before you go in there. And you have to, before you do any of that. In our days, all we did was, we just gave, everything was hand signals. This is before radios. We did all the hand signal, we did it all from the tops of cars. Because that's the only way you could see. You could stand on the top of the car next to the locomotive. That was the head end man's job. That tail end man would be partway down the string of cars, and the conductor would be at the far end, and you just relayed the signals over the top. You could do go around curves that way. Now it's all radio. So it is different, definitely changed. Trains are much longer now. The cars, at those times, 40 foot was a standard car. Now most of the cars are minimum 60 feet long.
Now how does a conductor keep everything running smoothly? Or does it run smoothly?
It usually runs pretty smoothly. Most of the crews, especially on PG and BC Rail, they got along really good. It was like a big family. When it went to CN, there was an instant change because of management, I think. But because they thought, well, their biggest problem, they had quite a few problems as soon as they took over with derailments and that. They tried to run the trains. They don't have the grades we have here. Like going out of Pemberton here, you're climbing 2.2% grade up to Mons, which means that every 100 feet, you're rising 2.2 feet. That is a steep railway grade. If you turned a car loose just by gravity, like took the handbrakes off a car that's sitting on a grade like that, within a half a mile, it'd be up to 60 miles an hour. That actually happened. A car got away from Tisdale one time. They were loading scrap up there at Tisdale, and it went off at the curve just by the Green River Falls there. It was literally airborne.
Wow.
Just at 2 miles. I'm surprised it made it that far. But a lot of flat cars now are 80 feet long. And those container flats now, we don't have containers here. You've probably seen them on the main lines. The only reason we don't have container cars here is the tunnels in the Cheakamus Canyon are not high enough.
Oh.
Not high enough. Plus, I don't know whether those container trains would like all the curvature we have. This Squamish subdivision from Squamish to Lillooet has tremendous curvature. We have 2 separate mountain grades because you climb from, when you come out of Squamish northbound, you climb from Cheakamus all the way up to just south of Whistler. And you come across the top, you get to Mons, you drop down into Pemberton here. Like at Whistler, we're up at 2,200 feet. Here at Pemberton, you're 690.
Wow.
Then you climb up to Burke at 1,800 out of Mount Currie. You drop down to Darcy, which is just over 700. You go around both those lakes into Lillooet. And then you climb for 30 miles out of Lillooet up to Kelly Lake, 3,300 feet above sea level. That's hard to operate. That's why we always had I don't think people remember the pusher engines that used to sit there. And they used to run north to Darcy, pick up all the southbound trains. Didn't have to push northbound because on PG, BC Rail, all the revenue was moving south. It was mainly trains northbound were empty. You didn't need pushers. But what you couldn't do is you couldn't run more than 80 cars empty without remote engines because the curvature, you just streamline the train. Power, and just straighten them right out. Off into the Cheakamus River they went. That's what happened with the CN. They tried to run a 143 car train and just straightened it out.
Why
Right
did they
into the
take
river.
the cabooses off?
That was a
Cost.
economic thing.
Oh, I'm
Because
so
when I
sad.
first hired on, we had the wooden cabooses where the crews, the conductor of the crew, there was a conductor, tail end brakeman, head end brakeman, that was what we call a pool crew. And we had, each conductor had his own caboose. So when you got into Lillooet, which was a terminal, they'd have to switch the cabooses off. So they got away from that, they went to what we called run-through cabooses, that was the steel ones. And then we had to, when we had those, what we call pool cabooses, we'd take that caboose off, and that was our accommodation while we were in Lillooet. Well, an old wooden caboose sitting in Lillooet at 40 degrees Celsius, either direction, minus 40 or plus 40, was not a great place to try and get a day's sleep for the night and run back, but that's the way it was.
You were telling us earlier now, you had your own incident.
Yeah, we had our own instance. This one was a little different. It wasn't because time, it was because a train order meet. I was on a freight, we were coming south, and we're just north of Birkin. January was the year, January 1971. And luckily, it was January because there's no leaves on the trees, and we're coming up the hill to Birkin to meet the passenger train, the northbound passenger train. And the crew on the northbound passenger train, we had train orders saying, number 46, meet number 1 at Birkin. Very straightforward. We're number 46, the way freight. And I'm talking to Bill Hales, our engineer, and I'm talking to Bill, and all of a sudden his eyeballs just went, when I'm looking at him, and I look ahead and there's a headlight. Wow. Adrenaline sets right in. I got out of the seat on the brakeman side, out the back door of the engine behind Bill, and I was standing on the ground when they hit. Adrenaline. Nobody got hurt in that one except the baggageman on the Bud car, who was a fellow by the name of Warren McNamee, the superintendent who had hired me. He jumped out and cut his nose on a crust of the snow.
Oh, no.
And I said, Warren, you okay? And he said, yeah, what a hell of a way to spend your 52nd birthday, he said. There was 4 guys, engineer, who had he had about 40 years experience, and there was Bud and Lauren and a fellow by the name of Dick Steininger. They all had a minimum of 30 years experience each. They all forgot about the meet. It was right there. Meet the 46 at Birkin. Yeah. So then, now if something like that happened, right away you're off to trauma or something. Not to us. When we hit, we wrecked the lead locomotive on our train, broke all the air pipes and that, so we couldn't move. The motors fell off the Bud car when the force of the explosion, all the motor mounts dropped, and the Bud cars dropped right there, the motors dropped right between the rails. So we got that all wired up, pushed them back to Birkin. What did they do? They took our crew, because we were in the right, they said, okay, you guys haul the Bud car crew and the passengers to Lillooet, and they took the other crew out of service. But that's the kind of trauma counseling we got at that time.
Yeah.
They just left you back to work, I mean.
Yeah.
But that was one of my little escapades.
Where you when those butane?
The one over here
blew
at
up?
the-
Yeah. Farm road there.
I think I was up in Prince George then, because I worked out of Prince George, I worked out of Quesnel.
Yeah,
I also worked pardon me?
That was like an atom bomb.
Oh yes, what happened, that car actually went on the ground at Mount Curry.
Yeah.
And then when it hit the switch at the little
Yeah.
shingle mill spur there,
Yeah.
there was a beehive burner there and the propane went kaboom.
What year was that?
I'm
was,
not, I think the early 60s.
63,
Three?
67, 60.
That late?
Yeah, it was 65, 67, somewhere in there. It was.
Joe Antonelli donated a
67,
photo that he
I
took
was George.
of the mushroom cluster.
I was sitting in the science room at the high school, and all of a sudden the window started to shake like crazy, and we looked out the window, and there was like an atom bomb. Just went up and
Big
like
mushroom.
mushroom.
Snowstorms.
Snowstorms. Well, Pemberton's a good snow belt, as anybody that's lived here for a while knows. But one of the,
Used to, not anymore.
no, it's not as bad now. But we spent one night in the Cheakamus Canyon. We were going down, it was January, I believe it was 72. We were going down on the way freight down through McGuire, and that McGuire's a heavy snow belt too, Brandywine area. And it was nice, dry snow. It's just flying over the front of the locomotive. And the conductor, he calls up to us. We had radios then, and He says, Bill, he says, I can only see one rail back here behind us. And Bill says, that's one more than we can see up here, he says.
Oh, great.
Yeah. End of conversation. So we're sifting down through this nice powdery snow, and we get down south of Garibaldi, and it changes from dry snow to wet snow. And we go into this rock cut, and we go into snow about 6 feet deep, and we just, it just lifts the traction motors of the locomotives up off the track. So the wheels are sitting about this. We didn't derail or anything, but it lifts them up about a quarter inch. You have no more traction.
Yeah.
The snow is right level with the cab windows. And we sat there from about 18 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock at night. I think it was about 6 o'clock in the morning before we got out of there. There was 3 snow plows working that day on the Squamish sub. That's how bad the snow was. They had 3 plow crews out.
Wow.
And that's when they had the silver thaw in Squamish, the freezing rain. And it lasted probably 20 hours. Usually a freezing rain lasts an hour. Not this one. It took down power lines. Brackendale was with it. 72. Brackendale was
I lived in Squamish then, I remember it.
Brackendale was without power for a week.
Yeah.
Ice storm.
Ice storm. Yeah, it was an ice storm.
Long ice storm.
Yeah, it was a long, long ice storm.
On the lakes.
No, actually, I never had any adventures along the lake. When we did one phenomenon we did have when we lived in Shellal in 1956 was that Seton Lake froze.
Oh.
It froze over, literally,
That was
all
the
the
first
way.
time in a long
Hmm?
That was the first time. in
Yes, it
forever.
was, and we actually skated to Lillooet. I don't think it's been done since then, and people that lived there couldn't remember before. It was just it was really, it was turned down to about minus 20, I guess, but no wind. So the lake stayed calm for a long, long time. Usually when the ice started, you'd get a wind and to break it up. This time it stayed calm for, must have been 3 weeks, and the lake just froze like glass. The hardest part of being a trainman, I guess, well, even a conductor now, because you're the only person that's out on the ground, is if when the train goes into emergency, when you lose your air, the train goes, usually that's what we call a hose bag. That's between each car, the train line, that's your air for your brakes on every car. And if those part, you're into emergency. So when first thing that happens after you go into emergency is you pick up a pipe wrench, a hose bag, your radio, your lamp, your parka, and off you go. And you take a pen and a piece of paper because you don't know, you might be derailed. When you get back there, you've got to write down car numbers. Pretty hard to remember if there's 10 or 12 cars on the ground. Because that's the first thing your dispatcher wants to know, your rail traffic controller. But how things have changed since I hired on was when we had the caboose and the head end, when something happened on a 50, well, even a 40-car train would be a big train then. And you only have to go 20 car lengths from each direction before you
Figure out
found something.
where it was. Yeah.
Now the trains are 100 cars long and you're going from one direction. It's probably the 98th car.
Yeah.
It's got something wrong, yes, quite likely. And then you have to fix it and walk all the way back. Rock slides, that's what you're asking about, rock slides.
Or any rock slide incidents that you heard.
I've heard
colleagues
of.
get?
I know of one big one actually, just south of Pemberton here. I don't know how many people have ever walked down from the Narran Falls crossing and come north. They talk about the big rock there. Is anybody familiar with that big rock that's laying right beside the railway track there? And I'm talking big, like it's as big as this room. And it come down off the mountain and it hit the roadbed and moved it over. My father was a section foreman. It didn't land on the track. It just, so they had to reline all the track around there. The rock's too big to move and they didn't even blow it. They didn't blast it. It's still there. And it's only about 200, wouldn't even be 200 yards from the crossing. If you're driving up towards Narran Falls, right-hand side and back towards Pemberton on the high side of the track. Another bad spot for rocks is right at Narran Falls. They used to call that the 54 mile, or 54 mile. Well, there's some big rock, and it came from a long ways back. I remember Dad telling me that he could see the path through, it cut through the trees.
That's why Suicide Hill is called Suicide Hill, because it kept sliding all
Yeah,
the
that's
time
right.
and fill the tracks.
Yeah, fill the tracks down
And the
there.
road would always be like this instead of like that.
Yeah, that's one thing you don't want to hit the curve with the elevation the wrong way. You're going, you're going on the ground.
Trevor Mills had talked about a phenomenon where the tracks would kink.
That's in sun. Yeah, this kind of weather's great for that.
So explain that.
The rail expands and it has nowhere to go, so it's got to kick sideways. So you can get some pretty terrific sun kinks. That's
So
what we
that
call sun
happens
kinks.
on a straight stretch.
It usually happens on a straight stretch. But it can happen in a curve, but what it'll do is just push the whole curve up. And it can happen right underneath your train. Which can be a little hairy.
Yeah.
Especially if you're on the caboose, the engineer went through the curve okay, and you're on the caboose, all of a sudden your caboose goes like this sideways. You stay on the track, but you say, what the hell was that? And you look back and there's the track behind you like a
When it
pretzel.
cools,